Have you ever walked into a luxurious place, and the moment you stepped through the door, they had already decided you don't belong? Not because you were dressed poorly, not because you couldn't afford it, but simply because of who you are. Picture this. A weekend evening. Warm, golden lights drape over a five-star restaurant. Crystal glasses glimmer beneath the chandelier. The clinking of silverware blends with the proud laughter of guests who belong to the upper class. And then, you, a confident, successful black man, approach the host stand with the same courtesy as any paying guest. "Sorry, we're fully booked." A soft sentence, but sharp as a blade. You glance around, 5 empty tables still in view, and you know this isn't about being fully booked. This is about them deciding you don't deserve to sit here. The sting of that moment is all too familiar. So many of us don't even react anymore. We swallow the anger, we walk away, we tell ourselves we're better than that. But what if just once the person who was dismissed didn't walk away? What if he didn't just claim a table, but claimed the very place that turned him away? That's exactly what happened to Malik Davenport. He didn't leave like a defeated man. He left like a storm-gathering wind. And 15 minutes later, when those doors opened again, that entire restaurant belonged to him. If you've ever felt underestimated, rejected, even when you knew you deserved better, leave a comment and share your story. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss stories where the tables turn like this. Because that night, Malik didn't just reclaim a dinner. He reclaimed his dignity. And here's how it all began. Malik Davenport paused in front of the floor-to-ceiling glass doors of Le Carillon, one of the most lauded culinary heavens of the elite. He wasn't wearing the kind of showy designer suit people put on to flex their status, just a perfectly fitted charcoal suit. Understated, yet elegant. Beside him was Ava, his longtime friend, who could always tell when Malik was truly at ease, and when he was hiding a storm behind his smile. Inside felt like another world. Golden lights washed over marble-inlaid walls. Silverware tapped porcelain plates in a delicate rhythm like a classical score. Red wine swirled in crystal-thin glasses, giving off an aroma that was both soothing and smug. Women in glittering evening gowns, men in razor-sharp tuxedos. It was a scene Malik had witnessed 1,000 times but had never truly seen himself in. They walked up to the host stand. The young manager, hair in a perfect chignon, greeted them with a polite, professional smile warm enough to be serviceable, cold enough to keep them at a distance. But when her eyes flicked down at Malik's modest suit, the smile froze into a tight mask. Malik recognized that look, the same one he'd seen since he was a boy. Kicked out of a department store because he didn't look like a real customer. "I'm sorry," she said, voice smooth but cold as steel. "We're fully booked tonight." Malik glanced around. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 tables sat empty, dressed in pristine white linens, waiting. He smirked. Ava arched an eyebrow, pressing her lips together as if holding back a sharp retort. "Fully booked," Malik repeated, his tone flat, as if confirming the information. "That's correct, sir." Her fake smile clung stubbornly to her face. Then Malik heard a soft, amused chuckle from a nearby table. 2 salt-and-pepper-haired men in expensive suits didn't bother hiding the way they were looking at him like he'd stumbled into a place where he didn't belong. Malik wasn't new to this. He'd built an entire financial empire on top of looks like that. But tonight, he wasn't here to prove his worth. He was here to eat. Ava leaned in, whispering, "Want me to ask for the higher up I can?" Malik's smile stayed fixed on the hostess. Calm, too calm. A smile that made it impossible to tell if it was politeness or a warning. "No," he said, "let them think they've won." He turned his back on the stares, the fake smiles, and the quiet laughter. But Ava knew when Malik smiled like that, no one had actually won. Because Malik Davenport never left a table, unless it was to set his own. And in that moment, what looked like retreat was the quiet forming of a storm. Malik didn't rush out. He lingered, fingertips lightly brushing the polished wood of the host stand, as though considering his next words. But he wasn't thinking. He was observing. It was the habit of a man who'd spent a lifetime in rooms where the unspoken mattered more than anything said. The hostess's eyes told him everything her rehearsed apology did not. He tilted his head, still smiling, but his voice dropped low enough to make Ava's skin prickle. "Are you absolutely sure there are no tables?" It wasn't a question, it was a test. The hostess hesitated for a fraction of a second before regaining her frosty composure. "That's correct, sir." And then, leaning in, with a voice low enough to cut, "This is a restaurant for real guests." Real guests. The words hit like the slam of a door. Malik had heard that sound his entire life as a boy pulled out of a movie theater because that seat isn't for you. As a young man, told by a bank clerk. Savings accounts aren't really necessary for people like you, and now, as a billionaire hedge fund owner, wrapped in silk and delivered with a polite smile, he still heard it. A throat cleared behind him. One of the older men at the nearby table leaned back in his chair and said to his companion, "Funny how everyone thinks they deserve to eat here." Ava turned to Malik, fire in her eyes. "You're just going to let that slide?" Malik didn't answer right away. He scanned the room, the empty tables, the smug faces, the people convinced they belonged here more than he did. Then he smiled, a small, almost amused curve of his lips. "No," he said finally. "Sometimes the best thing you can do is let them finish writing their own script." Ava narrowed her eyes. She knew that tone. When Malik spoke like that, it meant the game had already started, they just didn't know they were playing. "Let's go," Malik said. "Go where Ava asked. You'll see." They walked out, leaving behind the tinkling silverware, the perfumed air, and the soft, mocking laughter. But Malik didn't walk like a man defeated. He walked like someone leaving a meeting he'd be back to chair. And when the glass door closed behind them, Ava knew wherever Malik went, sooner or later, it belonged to him. Because this dinner would be served, just not the way they thought. On the sidewalk, Ava quickened her pace to keep up with him, heels clicking against the pavement like a drumbeat. "You're just going to let them do that to you, Malik? I've seen you negotiate with worse people and never back down. Why let them off so easy tonight?" Malik shoved his hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the glittering avenue ahead. "Ava," he said, his tone as calm as if he'd just left a symphony instead of an insult. "Some battles aren't worth fighting. At least, not in the opening round." Ava gave a dry laugh. "You always talk like that right before you do something reckless." Malik stopped under the fiery canopy of a red maple outside the hotel across the street. He pulled out his phone, typed a short message. "Plan B, now," then slid it back into his pocket like he'd just ordered dinner. Ava crossed her arms. "Plan B. Do I get to know what that is?" Malik shot her a sidelong glance, eyes glinting with that infuriating mix of mischief and inevitability she'd grown to both dread and admire. "All you need to know," he said, "is that dinner's about to get a whole lot better." Ava fell silent, not because his answer clarified anything it didn't, but because it didn't have to. Malik had a way of speaking that made people both uneasy and absolutely certain he knew exactly what he was doing. A sleek Bentley glided past, then a Rolls-Royce. Malik watched them like a parade of people who thought themselves untouchable. He chuckled. "Funny," he said. "They always forget these tables don't really belong to them. Sometimes, the host is just running late." Ava barked out a laugh. "You know, one day someone's going to write a book about you." Title: The Man Who Smiled Before He Tore Everything Down. Malik shrugged. "Maybe." Then, with a quietness heavy as stone, he added, "But tonight, Ava, my dinner will be served, and when it is, Everyone in that room will stand up not because they want to, but because they have to. Ava didn't say another word. She didn't need to. She'd known Malik long enough to understand when he said things like that, it meant the storm wasn't coming. It was already here. And the only question left was when the meal was finally served. Who would still have a seat? Malik paused at the door, his hand pressed against the cold glass. Ava thought he would keep walking, but instead, he turned back. Slowly, deliberately. Each step took him to the host stand again. The young hostess stood tall, her confidence untouched, as if nothing had happened. "Are you sure you're out of tables?" Malik asked. His voice wasn't loud, it wasn't rushed, but it cut sharp like a thin blade. This wasn't the tone of an angry customer. It was the tone of a man who made people afraid to lie to his face. The hostess blinked, just once, then she regained her calm. "Yes, sir," she said, her practiced smile glued back in place, polite, distant, and cold. Malik tilted his head slightly, as if hearing an old, familiar song. "Out of tables," he repeated, not to confirm it, but to let her hear herself say it. The hostess leaned in slightly, lowered her voice like she was sharing a secret. "This," she said, "is a restaurant for real customers." Real customers. 2 words, sharp as a slap. Ava's lips pressed tight. Malik just smiled. It didn't surprise him. It never did. He'd heard these words his whole life. As a boy, when the movie theater manager dragged him out of his seat, "This isn't for kids like you." As a student, when the bank clerk refused him an account without looking him in the eye, "We serve potential clients." And now, as the CEO of a billion-dollar fund, those words still found him, wrapped in silk, delivered with a polite smile. Malik didn't get angry. That wasn't his style. Anger would only make them feel right. "See, just like I thought of you." No, Malik chose a different path. He leaned an elbow on the polished wooden stand and stared directly at the hostess. "Thank you," he said, voice soft as if they were talking about the weather. "You just told me more than you think." Ava stared at him, ready to shake him by the shoulders. But she knew the game had already started. Malik stepped back and turned to Ava. "Let's go." Go where Ava asked, frustration creeping in. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he said almost to himself, "This table will be mine." And Ava understood. He wasn't talking about dinner. He was talking about the whole game. Malik stood still, letting those words run through him. Real customers. 2 short words, sharp enough to slice through old scars. He remembered. The 12-year-old boy dragged out of a theater seat. The staff saying, "This isn't for kids like you." The scholarship reception, when the front desk assumed he was there to serve, not to receive. The executive who half-joked, "You don't look like someone who signs 10-figure deals." It was always the same message. They just wrapped it prettier each time. And tonight, it came back again. In a restaurant with white tablecloths and wine worth a month of someone's salary. Ava broke his thoughts. "You heard that. Right," she whispered. "She basically told us you don't belong here." Malik kept his gaze on the hostess. "Oh, I heard it," he said lightly as if it were nothing more than small talk. Then he smiled. The kind of smile you couldn't tell was forgiveness or a warning. The hostess shifted, throat clearing, trying to regain control. But she saw it in his eyes. Malik wasn't the type to walk away quietly. "Thank you," Malik said. Then turned to Ava. "Let's go." Ava grabbed his arm. "Go, that's it. You're letting them think they won." Malik didn't answer right away. He scanned the room slowly. The empty tables, the smug diners, the hostess's fake smile, the glittering chandeliers. Then he said softly, "No, I'm just giving them more time to feel safe." He pushed the door open and stepped into the night. Ava followed, her scarf catching in the evening wind. "You're really just walking away," she pressed, voice sharp now. Malik stopped under the streetlight. "Ava," he said slowly, "they just wrote their own script." "What does that even mean?" she asked. Malik shrugged like public humiliation meant nothing. But Ava knew him. Every word, every look, every laugh tonight he was storing them, like ammunition. "Some roles," Malik said, "people take eagerly, without realizing the cost. That hostess, those men at the table, they think they're on their stage, but they're really just performing for me." Ava crossed her arms, leaning against a lamppost. "You sound like you're writing a novel." "Malik, what are you planning?" He pulled out his phone, typing fast as if he'd rehearsed this moment. A short text, direct, no fluff. "Plan B, now." Ava watched him. "Plan B, please tell me you didn't just buy something." Malik chuckled the quiet laugh of someone who'd already seen the ending before anyone else even knew the game had started. "We came here for dinner. Right, I'm just making sure it's worth the effort." His answer didn't calm her. It made her shiver. She'd seen that look before. In boardrooms. In takeover deals. When Malik turned the entire table in his favor with a single move. That same look was back. Malik slid his hands into his pockets. Watching cars glide past a Bentley, a Rolls like a private parade of people who thought they owned the world. He smiled. "Sometimes," he said, "you don't argue for a table, you just buy the restaurant." Ava let out a slow breath. Half in shock, half in anticipation. And in that moment, she knew. The real show hadn't even started yet. The night wind swept down the boulevard, as if trying to erase the last trace of sound from that restaurant. Malik and Ava stood beneath a pale yellow streetlight. Their shadows stretched across the stone pavement, blending into the passing crowd. Across the street, the glowing windows of Le Carillon looked warm and untouchable, as if it had never been a place meant for people like them. Ava tugged her scarf tighter and glanced at Malik. "You're being too gentle," she said, her voice sharp, her anger plain. "You let them talk to you like that. You let them look at you like that. Malik, that's not you." He didn't answer right away. Malik stayed still, watching the headlights of luxury cars glide by. His face was unreadable, so still it made Ava want to shake him. She wanted to wake up the anger she knew was still burning inside. But Malik had his own way of swallowing anger. He always did. Silent first, and then. He moved the board while no one saw his hands. "Gentle," he finally said, a faint smile flickering at the corner of his mouth. "Some call it gentle. I call it calculated." Ava crossed her arms and stepped closer. "Calculated, Malik. They called you an outsider to your face. And your calculation is coming out here for fresh air." Malik turned his gaze to her. There it was, that strange light Ava knew so well. The light of a man who didn't need to win a single argument because he controlled the whole game. "Some insults," he said slowly, "don't need a reply. They just need the right time to be repaid with something they'll never forget." Ava shook her head, half doubtful, half intrigued. "And what exactly are you planning to do?" Malik didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out his phone. He scrolled through a few messages, then typed a short line. "Plan B, now." One press of his thumb. Sent. Like pulling a trigger. Ava narrowed her eyes. "Plan B. Malik, don't tell me you just bought something again." Malik chuckled softly. It was the kind of laugh you couldn't tell was humor or a warning. "Ava," he said, slipping the phone back into his coat. "If I have to endure a cheap performance like tonight, the least I can do is make sure the table we sit at belongs to me." Ava stayed quiet. She didn't ask more. She knew Malik. When he smiled like that, nothing was random. And then it hit her. Malik wasn't leaving empty-handed. He was just getting ready to come back this time, to a table reserved for someone who owned the whole room. Malik stood under the street lamp, the golden light painting his face like a sculpture deep in thought. He pulled out his phone again. His fingers moved across the screen with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment. 4 words. Plan B, now, and one tap as simple as ordering dinner. Ava watched him. She tried to peek at his screen, but only caught faint reflections of the letters. Plan B, she pressed, raising a brow. Malik, I know that look. The last time you wore that look, a multi-million-dollar company became yours in a week. Are you buying something again? Malik's smile sharpened, thin, controlled. Sometimes, he said, sliding the phone back into his pocket, the best move is to let people shoot themselves in the foot. Ava folded her arms, leaning against a lamppost. You always talk in half answers. Can you just say what you're doing? Or do I have to guess how you're going to get our dinner back? Malik's eyes stayed fixed on the restaurant. The lights inside reflected off the glass a stage he had just walked away from. Not as an actor, as the director. No need for shouting, he said calmly. No need for chaos. People remember longer when the payback is served cold, and on the very table they once refused you. Ava laughed short and sharp, the laugh of someone realizing they'd just stepped into a bigger game than they imagined. What are you really doing? Malik. He didn't answer immediately. He exhaled, eyes locked on the glowing windows of Le Carillon. Sometimes, he said slowly, you don't need to take what people have. You just make them watch while everything they thought was theirs changes hands. Ava blinked, half shocked, half thrilled. Changes hands, Malik, you're not saying. Not yet, Malik cut her off, his voice quiet, enough to stop her questions. He turned his back to the restaurant and walked toward the waiting car. And in that casual stride, Ava realized something. This wasn't about dinner anymore. This was a chess match. And the people inside Le Carillon had just made their first move, exactly how Malik wanted. Then the hum of engines. A deep, rolling sound that swallowed the noise of the street. From the far end of the boulevard, a fleet of black cars appeared. Headlights cutting through the night like a river of steel. These weren't taxis. These weren't rideshares. Ava recognized them immediately. Luxury sedans, massive SUVs, the kind only power or money could summon. She turned to Malik, but he stood still. Hands in his pockets. Eyes on the approaching cars. No words. No wasted movement. Doors opened in near-perfect sync. Men in tailored suits stepped out. Efficient, sharp, each carrying briefcases or tablets. They moved like a well-rehearsed storm. No hesitation. A few approached Malik, bowed slightly, exchanged quick words, then dispersed, each already knowing their role. Ava opened her mouth, but Malik raised a hand. Just watch, he said, his voice deep, commanding. She inhaled sharply. Fine, but at least tell me, who did you just call here? Malik tilted his head, that faint, unreadable smile back on his lips. The people who helped me, set the table. Ava blinked. Set the table, where Malik, don't tell me? He didn't answer. Instead, he looked back at Le Carillon, the same restaurant whose hostess had slammed the door in his face minutes ago. Now, he stood here, watching it. The way a buyer examines property before signing the papers, Ava began to understand. And yet, she couldn't quite believe it. You can't be serious, she whispered. You're not actually... Malik interrupted, his voice calm but razor-sharp. I'm not planning, I'm doing. By now, several restaurant staff waiters, maybe a manager, had stepped outside. They stared at the convoy of black cars with confusion, whispering nervously, trying to figure out what was happening. Then, one of Malik's men, tall, broad-shouldered, glasses perched on his nose, walked up to them. He handed over a set of documents and said something that left them speechless. Ava clutched the strap of her bag, her heart pounding. "Malik, what did you just do?" Malik glanced at her and smiled. This time, sharper than ever. "I'm just taking back what was already mine." And in that moment, Ava understood. The payback wasn't coming. It was already here, and everyone inside Le Carillon was about to stand up, not to leave, but to greet their new owner. The night wind swept across the sidewalk, carrying the scent of expensive wine mixed with exhaust fumes from the Bentleys and Maybachs parked along the street. Malik stood still beneath the streetlight, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the glowing windows of Le Carillon like a hunter watching his prey. Ava stood beside him, saying nothing. She could feel it in the air around him. Quiet, but stretched tight, like a string ready to snap. 10 minutes passed. To Ava, they felt like 10 wasted minutes. But to Malik, every second was long enough for old memories to scratch at scars he thought had healed. He remembered a meeting years ago in a lavish New York boardroom. Back then, Malik wasn't respected. He'd waited an hour in the lobby just to meet a white fund manager. And when he finally stepped into the room, the man said, "We don't think you're the kind of person who can handle a big deal." Malik didn't respond. He just smiled, silent. 6 months later, that same fund was begging him for a lifeline investment. He remembered a launch party for a tech company, where the chairman didn't even bother to shake his hand. Why? Because he assumed Malik worked catering. A year later, Malik became the company's largest shareholder. And that same chairman was forced to read Malik's name out loud at the annual meeting to a room full of people. Each memory was a cut, but also a reminder. None of Malik's battles had ever been won with words alone. Ava finally spoke, her frustration breaking through. "Why are you just standing here? Why not walk in and demand they apologize? Malik, I know you. You're not the type to swallow this." Malik turned his head toward her. His eyes were sharp, but his voice calm. "Ava, I'm not swallowing anything. I'm letting them believe they're safe." "Safe," Ava repeated, almost laughing. "Yes," he nodded. "People drop their guard when they think they've already won. That's when I make my move." One of the black SUVs blinked its turn signal. The driver stepped out, opened the rear door like he was welcoming royalty. Malik glanced at his watch. "It's time." Ava frowned. "Time for what?" Malik didn't answer. He just adjusted his collar, took a deep breath, like a man about to walk onto a stage. And Ava suddenly understood. The last 15 minutes weren't about waiting for a table. They were about preparing for a takeover. Ava folded her arms, leaning against the street lamp. The row of luxury cars didn't make her feel any calmer. This whole thing made her equal parts curious and furious. "Malik," she said, cutting through the heavy silence, "why put yourself through this? We could have walked in, demanded to see the manager, made them apologize. Why go the long way around?" Malik turned to her. Not angry, not flustered. Just steady? The look of a man who had already mapped out the entire board. "To let them think they're winning," he said, slow, deliberate, like he wanted every word to stick. Ava squinted. "Winning, Malik, they laughed at you. That's not winning. That's an opportunity," he interrupted. "Ava, anger makes people blind. I didn't come here for dinner service. I came here to teach them the cost of contempt." She wanted to argue, but didn't. Ava knew Malik too well. When he spoke in that tone, nothing could change his mind. Malik pulled out his phone, typed a few quick lines, His eyes never left the restaurant. They think they're standing above me, looking down. But when people are too busy enjoying their imaginary victory, they don't notice the ground shifting under them. "What are you going to do?" Ava pressed. Malik smiled. A small smile, part reassurance, part threat. "I'm going to show them who really sits at the highest table." He glanced at the restaurant again. Inside, the hostess still greeted guests with that pleasant, smug little smile. The men at the nearby table still clinked their glasses, clueless that their scene had already been rewritten. "Sometimes," Malik said, "you don't strike back right away. You let them finish acting out their little victory scene. Because the next one—" He paused. "Is the scene where they bow." Ava shivered. He spoke like this was theater. And he was the one directing the play. A man from the motorcade approached Malik, whispered something in his ear. Malik nodded, his eyes flashing. "It's done," he said. Ava blinked. "Done, Malik? Done what?" Malik adjusted his cufflinks, like he was about to step onto a stage. "5 more minutes, Ava, and when it happens, I want you to look them in the eye. Because nothing hurts more than realizing the man you dismissed as unworthy just bought the ground under your feet." Headlights flared, slicing through the misty street. Ava's pulse quickened. The motorcade came alive. Cars rumbling like an army ready for war. Doors opened in perfect sync. Men and women in sharp suits stepped out. Deliberate, silent. Each carrying briefcases or tablets. Their presence alone turned heads. Ava stared. "Malik, who are these people?" "My team," he said, as casually as if he were announcing the weather. Then he started walking toward the restaurant, each step carrying a chill with it. The men and women split into formation. One carried a thick folder. Another wore an earpiece, murmuring updates into a private line. Ava recognized some of them. Big-name lawyers, top financial advisors, people she'd seen in headlines about major acquisitions. And now they were here, on this sidewalk, outside a restaurant, like they were about to buy the whole building. "You're really doing this?" Ava asked. Half anxious, half in awe, Malik stopped in front of the glass doors. He turned slightly, flashing her the smile she'd seen so many times before, the one that meant he'd already won. "Ava, they said I wasn't worthy of a table. I'm just proving them wrong, on a level they can't even imagine." Inside, patrons started to notice. Eyes darted to the gathering outside. Curiosity. Annoyance. Confusion. A waiter opened the door, but before he could speak, one of Malik's lawyers stepped inside. He handed over documents and an ID card. The exchange was short. Enough to turn the waiter's expression from calm to nervous to downright panicked. Ava watched every second, her chest tight. Malik stayed silent. Still, unshakable. The quiet around him felt so heavy it seemed like even the street was holding its breath. Then the doors opened again. A gray-haired man stepped out. Clearly management. His voice trembled, but he tried to hold on to formality. "Mr. Davenport, we weren't aware you—" "No," Malik cut in, his voice soft. "And that was your first mistake tonight." Then he walked in. No glance back. Leaving Ava behind, along with the team of lawyers who had just begun clearing the path for the storm about to hit Le Carillon. And in that moment, Ava understood. This wasn't dinner anymore. This was history. The night they would all remember, when the man they dismissed walked in as the owner. Inside Le Carillon, the clinking of silverware still rang. The polite laughter still floated through the air as if a storm wasn't waiting just outside the door. The evening manager, a man in a perfectly tailored suit with a smile practiced over hundreds of nights, was entertaining a group of regulars. He told a charming story about a celebrity who once dined there. They laughed. Just enough to be polite, just enough to keep everyone safe in their little bubble of class. Then the glass door swung open. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a late-arriving guest. It was a group of people in dark suits. They walked in like they owned the place because in a few minutes, one of them would... Guests near the door stopped eating. Some frowned, annoyed at the intrusion. A tall man in black-rimmed glasses headed straight for the hostess stand. He dropped a thick folder onto the counter and said, his voice sharp and final, "Mr. Davenport wants to sign the agreement. Bring out your senior manager. Now." The room fell silent. The young hostess, the same one who had confidently turned Malik away earlier, froze. Her face flushed like someone had pulled the mask off at a masquerade. "Sir, what agreement?" she stammered. The man didn't answer. He just stared at her like the question itself was absurd, then repeated, slower this time. "Get your manager, now." At the bar, whispers started. A woman in a sequined dress leaned toward her companion. "What's happening? Who's Davenport?" Moments later, the manager appeared. The same middle-aged man who had been telling his safe little story now hurried out, his practiced smile trembling at the edges. What seems to be the problem?" The man in glasses handed him the folder. His words cut through the air like a blade. "Mr. Davenport has completed the purchase of this restaurant. He wants to finalize the paperwork, and he wants to discuss management changes." The room went dead silent. No more polite laughter, no more clinking glasses. Just shock. The manager blinked, stunned. You bought the carry-on." The answer didn't come from the man in glasses. It came from Malik. He walked in at that exact moment, slow, deliberate like every stare in the room had been accounted for. "That's right," Malik said, his voice calm, almost casual. "I figured, if I was denied a seat, the most reasonable thing to do was to buy the whole place." Whispers rippled across the room. The same guests who had smirked at him earlier now turned away, embarrassed. But this was just the overture. Malik hadn't come to eat. He'd come to change the entire table. He crossed the floor like the door had never been closed to him. No glance at the two men who had chuckled when he was refused, no acknowledgement of the stares that followed his every move. He went straight to the hostess stand, where the manager and the young hostess now stood stiff as statues, clutching the folder like it might save them. He stopped in front of them. No smile. No greeting. Just a stare so sharp it seemed to shrink the room. "Now," Malik asked, his voice quiet but echoing like a bell, "are there any tables available?" The manager swallowed hard. "Sir, I'm sure we can." "Don't rush," Malik cut in, his tone flat, but pressing like a wall moving closer. He let his eyes drift across the room, the white-draped tables, the glimmering crystal glasses, the people who once believed this was their place. Then he looked back. "I bought everything," he said. The words fell like a hammer. No one spoke. No one moved. The sound of cutlery, the faint hum of conversation gone. Ava, watching from nearby, folded her arms and smiled. She'd seen Malik close bigger deals than this, but never in a way that felt this public, this pointed, this sweet. The manager blinked, sweat forming at his hairline. You bought all of Le Carillon?" Malik nodded, just once, as casually as if he'd ordered another bottle of wine. "That's right. I don't like being turned away when there are empty seats, and I hate being treated like an outsider, especially when people like you work for me in other places." A murmur rose from the corner. One of the men who'd mocked Malik earlier now kept his head down, avoiding eye contact. Malik leaned on the counter, his hand resting on the polished wood. "Now," he said, each word like a period at the end of a sentence, "prepare me a table, the best one, and as for you—" His eyes locked on the hostess. She flinched, stepping back half a pace. "You might want to consider if you still have a place here, when I decide who stays." The words sliced through the room, tearing the glossy mask off Le Carillon. No one dared laugh, no one dared speak. And Ava knew. The game Malik started on the sidewalk had now moved to the table. But this wasn't dinner. This was the opening night of a new owner. Malik stayed still. Not yelling, not rushing. And that silence, that unshakable calm, was what unsettled everyone the most. He leaned in slightly, his voice low, cold as steel. "You could be as replaceable as that chair." The room froze. No silverware clinked. No one even pretended to breathe normally. The words landed like a blow. Not loud, but devastating. The hostess flushed red, lips trembling as if she wanted to protest, but nothing came out. Guests nearby averted their eyes, staring at their plates though every ear was tuned to him. Ava tilted her head, smirking. She didn't always agree with Malik's ruthless streak. But this was pure Malik Sharp, calculated, impossible to counter. Malik didn't wait for a response. He straightened his jacket, turned to the manager. "I didn't come here to make a scene," he said. "I came to change how this place operates, because if a five-star restaurant treats guests like this, it doesn't deserve to be called five-star." The manager pressed his lips together and lowered his head. His role, his authority gone in an instant. Around them, the same guests who had dismissed Malik now watched in silence. Some even raised their phones, recording the moment. The man they had once seen as out of place now stood as their new host. Ava stepped closer, whispering near Malik's ear. "You know exactly what you just did, don't you?" Malik didn't look at her, but he smiled. "Yes," he said. "I just redefined the value of everything in this room." Then he turned back to the manager. "Bring me the menu. I'll be dining at the best table, and when I'm done, we'll discuss staffing." The air felt heavy, like everyone there had just witnessed the rules of the game rewritten. Malik walked to the largest, most beautiful table in the center of the room, the one once reserved for Le Carillon's real guests. He pulled out the chair, sat down with unnerving composure, as if the entire restaurant now existed only as his backdrop. And in that moment, everyone understood. This wasn't a man getting revenge for an insult. This was an owner redefining power in a way they would never forget. The atmosphere inside Le Carillon shifted so quickly. Ava almost felt like she could see it. Just 15 minutes ago, every eye on Malik carried contempt. A black man turned away at the door. A man who didn't belong here. Now those same eyes were different, a strange mix of confusion, caution, and fear. The evening manager, who had tried to smile when Malik first walked in, now stood several feet back, head lowered, voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Davenport, we deeply apologize for the inconvenience. It was all a misunderstanding. If you'll allow it, we'll prepare the best table immediately." Malik raised a hand, silencing him. Slow, controlled, enough to stop the man cold. "No need to explain," Malik said, his voice calm, as if they were discussing something trivial. "What happened tonight wasn't a misunderstanding. It's how you run this place, and that is the problem." No one in the room dared breathe too loudly. The young hostess, the same one who had sneered at Malik earlier, now stood behind the counter, her hands clasped tight at her waist. Even the guests at the bar, the ones who had enjoyed the little spectacle earlier, couldn't meet his eyes. Malik let his gaze drift across the room, reading every reaction like entries in a ledger. Then he spoke, still soft, but with words that landed like a weight. A place that calls itself high class but chooses to treat guests with prejudice isn't a restaurant. It's just a fancy box full of illusions. Ava stood beside him, arms folded, a half-smile tugging at her lips. She knew he wasn't just talking to the manager. He was talking to the entire room and to anyone who would repeat this story once they left. The manager pressed his lips together, forcing composure. "Mr. Davenport, we will do everything we can to—" Malik cut him off again, this time locking eyes with him. "Good. Start by apologizing, not just to me. Apologize to every person who has ever been turned away here simply because they didn't look like the customers you wanted." The words sliced through the tense air. A few guests glanced at each other. One nodded, others lowered their eyes, unwilling to openly agree. Malik sat at the largest table in the room, his posture relaxed, as if he had always belonged there. He didn't need to shout, he didn't need to slam the table. It was his composure, that unshakable calm, that made the whole room tremble. And Ava knew this was only the beginning. Malik hadn't even eaten yet, but Le Carillon had already swallowed a bitter lesson. The manager stood awkwardly, voice trembling. "Mr. Davenport, we truly regret what happened. Please." Malik didn't let him finish. He leaned back in his chair, one hand resting lazily on the table's edge. His tone flat and cold. "Don't apologize to me." The room went still again. Malik tilted his head slightly, eyes fixed on the manager as if looking straight through him, straight into the quiet machinery of prejudice this place was built on. "Apologize to the people like me who were turned away," he continued, each word precise, like a clean cut of a blade. The manager blinked, confused. "Sir." Malik didn't look away. "The people who were told no tables available when there were empty seats. The people judged for their skin, their clothes, their voice, before they even stepped through the door. They don't get to come back like I do. They don't have the power to make you see them. Apologize to them, not to me." A murmur rippled through the room. A middle-aged diner nodded quietly, whispering something to their companion. A young couple near the door looked at Malik with something more than surprised respect. The hostess stayed frozen behind the counter, her face flushed. Malik's words had stripped away the polite mask she had worn to hide her arrogance. Ava leaned toward him, whispering, "You're turning this entire restaurant into a morality class." Malik smirked, eyes still forward. "Not a class, a reckoning." The manager mumbled, head low. We will review our service policies." Malik raised an eyebrow, as if the answer had fallen far short. "Policies, don't blame paperwork. This isn't the fault of a written rule. This was a choice by her, by you, and by anyone who watched it happen, and said nothing." Several people lowered their heads, avoiding his gaze. Malik stayed composed, but Ava knew this kind of calm put everyone else on trial. He leaned back, voice so soft it was almost a breath, yet loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Class isn't in the tablecloths or the vintage wine. It's in how you treat people, when you think they bring nothing of value." No one answered. No clinking silverware, no hushed conversations. Only Malik's voice, echoing through a dining room that now felt more like a courtroom. And Ava understood. This wasn't revenge. This was Malik holding up a mirror and forcing everyone here to see their reflection. He let the silence linger, long enough for every word to sink in. Then his eyes shifted, scanning table by table. No more defiant stares. Only averted eyes, shame, and quiet unease. His gaze landed on the VIP table, the large one at the center of the room, covered in pristine white linen and gleaming silverware. It had always been reserved for real guests, politicians, celebrities, power players. Le Carillon loved to parade as trophies. Malik tilted his head slightly, as if appraising a piece of art. "I'll sit there," he said, his voice calm but ringing like an order. No one moved. The manager swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the table as if to confirm Malik really meant that table. Malik turned his head, fixing him with a look. "Bring me the menu, the one without prices." A faint ripple of whispers swept through the room. Some guests didn't bother hiding their shock. Ava followed Malik, arms folded, biting back a grin. She knew exactly what this was. He wasn't just demanding a seat. He was taking the single most powerful place in the room in a way no one could deny. The young hostess still stood behind the counter, her face burning red, fingers twisting together. Malik glanced her way, said nothing. But his look alone made her drop her eyes, wishing she could disappear. The manager took a deep breath, nodded, and gestured for a waiter. The young server bolted to fetch the menu, like a soldier carrying out a direct order from a commanding officer. Malik adjusted his cufflinks, pulled out the chair, and sat at the VIP table with unnerving ease as though it had always been his seat. Ava followed, settling into the chair opposite him. She leaned forward, whispering with a crooked smile, "You know, if they have any memory at all, tonight will haunt them forever." Malik leaned back, eyes on the ceiling, a faint smile at the corner of his lips. Good, that's the only way a lesson outlasts a meal. No one spoke. No one dared. Le Carillon had become a stage and every actor was terrified of missing their lines. And Ava knew. Now that Malik was seated at that table, the real feast had just begun. Malik sat down at the center table as if it had been built for him. The large table, draped in crisp white linen, set with gleaming silverware and crystal glasses catching the light from above, looked like a private stage. This table was usually reserved for the real guests, the ones Le Carillon wanted to be seen, the names worth attaching to the restaurant's reputation. But tonight, that table had a new owner. Ava sat across from him, legs crossed, studying Malik with a mix of amusement and curiosity. You see that she murmured, "They still don't know what to do with you. Half of them are pretending not to look. The other half can't stop staring." Malik only shrugged, his gaze steady. He knew every eye in the room was on this table and that was exactly what he wanted. A lesson doesn't always need to be spoken aloud. The staff moved faster now. A young waiter approached, his hands trembling slightly as he set the menu on the table. Malik didn't bother looking at it. "Bring me the best dishes this kitchen can make," he said, his voice even, decisive. "And the oldest wine in your cellar, don't quote me the price." The young man nodded quickly and left, as if a weight had been lifted just by carrying out a direct order. Ava leaned in, resting an elbow on the table. "You know he's going to tell everyone about this, right? They'll talk about the man who walked in, bought the restaurant, and ordered without looking at a menu." Malik allowed himself a small smile. "Good, that's a story worth telling." The food began to arrive. Exquisite plates of seafood, imported beef, delicately prepared vegetables. Vintage wine, poured with care, its aroma filling the space. Everything served with the meticulous elegance usually reserved for the most exclusive guests. And Malik, by taking this table, had made himself the center of the room not as a guest, but as its master. The whispers rippled across the dining hall. Some looked at him with quiet admiration, others with confusion. But none dared give him the same contemptuous glances they had before. Malik had shifted the power dynamic simply by sitting down and forcing them to acknowledge his place. Ava raised her glass, gently clinking his. "Welcome to the power table," Malik replied with a faint smile. "This isn't a power table, it's just a dining table. But tonight," he paused, letting his gaze sweep the room, "it will redefine what you call a real guest." And Ava knew this dinner wouldn't end with dessert. It would end with a declaration no one in this room would forget. The silver plates had barely been set down when Malik slowly rose to his feet. He didn't need to tap his glass for attention. The room was already hanging on his every move. Malik rested one hand on the back of his chair, his eyes moving from table to table until they stopped on the line of staff by the wall, standing stiffly, waiting for a verdict. "Come here," he said, his voice steady and clear enough for the whole room to hear. The servers exchanged nervous glances, then stepped forward one by one, forming a line near Malik's table. The evening manager slipped in among them, head bowed low, as if trying to make himself smaller. Malik stood silent for a few seconds, letting the weight of the moment sink in. "From now on," he began, his voice deliberate, "how we treat our guests will change." A few servers blinked, startled. Ava leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, smirking. She knew Malik never missed a chance to turn a small moment into a big statement. "Class," Malik continued, "is not in the bill amount. It's not in their skin color, their clothes, or the cars they park outside. It's in how we respect every single person who walks through these doors. I am a guest. And I am an owner. And I will not tolerate a place where I or anyone else is treated as less than they deserve." A small murmur rose from a corner table. Some guests nodded. Others avoided eye contact, unwilling to publicly agree. Malik turned to the manager. "You will retrain this team. If anyone can't adapt, they can leave. And you, if you don't like this new direction, you can leave too." The manager's face drained of color. Yes, sir. I'll do as you ask." Malik's voice softened slightly as he looked at the staff. "You are not here to stand behind contempt. You're here to serve, but no one has the right to belittle you or the people you serve. Remember that." The young waiter, the same one who had trembled while handing him the menu, nodded, his eyes carrying a spark of newfound strength. Ava tilted her head, muttering just loud enough for him to hear. "You just turned dinner into a restructuring meeting." Malik sat back down, lifting his glass, his gaze still on the staff. "Not a meeting, an opening statement. Tonight, everyone here will learn what ownership really means, not just with money, but by changing the game itself." Ava understood. What Malik planted here tonight would last long after the last plate left this table. Malik set his glass down with a soft clink, the sound of punctuation. But Ava could tell he wasn't finished. He never spoke without leaving room for the next move. He turned to the manager, who still stared at the floor. "How long have you run this place?" Malik asked, his voice even. The man swallowed. 12 years, sir." 12 years. Malik repeated the number slowly, like he was weighing it. 12 years. And you let this place run like a club for people who looked the part. Long enough to see the problem. Not long enough to fix it. The manager said nothing, no defense left. Malik circled the table slowly, as though taking stock of a room he now owned. He stopped beside Ava, resting a hand lightly on the back of her chair. "To rebuild something rotten," he said slowly, "you need someone with a new vision, someone who knows what it feels like to walk in as an outsider." Ava raised an eyebrow. "You're not seriously." Malik didn't answer her. Instead, he turned to the staff and raised his voice so the whole room could hear. "From this moment on, this is the interim manager of Le Carillon." He pointed at Ava. Every head turned. Ava froze. Before she could speak, Malik continued. "She walked into this restaurant as an ordinary guest. She saw how you treated me. That experience is something your former manager could never understand." Malik glanced at the old manager. "Don't worry. She won't run this place like a palace of illusions. She'll run it like a place where every person is treated as human." A few staff members covered their mouths to hide their surprise. Some diners exchanged glances and a few even smiled, delighted by the audacity of it all. It was a clean, sharp blow to the arrogance this restaurant had built for years. Ava turned to Malik, her voice almost a whisper. "Are you out of your mind?" Malik gave a half-smile. "No. I just showed them how quickly power can change seats in one dinner." Ava leaned back, speechless. But in her eyes, the outrage she'd felt earlier had softened into something else, something closer to pride. And the entire room understood. The man they'd once dismissed as an unworthy guest now decided who stayed in this game. Malik rose from the VIP table, the so-called throne of this dining room, and walked toward the cluster of employees huddled near the host stand. His eyes swept over each of them, the young hostess with her flushed face staring at the floor, the waiters with clenched hands trying to mask their unease. The room was silent. Not the silence of respect. The silence of knowing that every word he was about to say would stay with them, burned into memory by fear, if not by choice. "Never forget," Malik began, his voice low but resonant, each word hammering into the air like a nail. "The person you consider not real enough might be the one signing your paychecks tomorrow." Some employees looked up, almost to confirm they'd heard him right. Malik didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. The words had landed. "Your job," he continued, slower, sharper, "is not to judge your guests with narrow eyes, not to decide who deserves a seat and who doesn't. Your job is to serve. Not to bow to the powerful, but to treat every single person with the same respect. That is class." The former manager kept his head bowed, silent. Malik turned to him, his stare as cold as steel. "Do you know where the problem lies? It's not the empty tables. It's not the policies. The problem is you and people like you who think you have the right to define someone else's worth." A shiver ran through the staff. Malik saw it. He wanted them to feel it, to remember it. He stopped in front of the young hostess, the one who had told him about real guests. "You can keep working here," Malik said, his voice calm but loud enough for the whole room. "But remember, the day you tell someone they aren't real enough might be the day you pull your own chair out from under yourself." She dropped her gaze, lips trembling, but said nothing. Malik wasn't looking for an apology. He didn't need one. He wanted them to remember not with words, but with the shame they would carry home. He stepped back, his voice rising just enough to reach them all. "Tonight, you will remember this: every door closed by prejudice can be forced open. Not by the person knocking, but by the one who buys the entire house." A faint murmur spread among the diners. From the table, Ava sat with her arms crossed, shaking her head with a cold, amused smile. "You just turned a lesson on service," she muttered, just loud enough for Malik to hear, into a slap across the face of the whole system. Malik smiled. He didn't deny it. And everyone in that room knew. Tonight's lesson wasn't just for the staff. It was for anyone who ever believed they owned the doors other people were just trying to walk through. The old manager stood there, fingers knotted in front of him like a man gripping the last scraps of his authority. His perfectly pressed suit now looked wrinkled under the weight of humiliation. He said nothing. But Malik knew exactly what was in his mind, the sting of being dragged from his pedestal in front of people who once looked at him with deference. Malik did nothing to soften the blow. He hadn't come here to make anyone comfortable. He wanted them to remember every detail of this moment seared into their minds like a scar. The diners who had watched Malik be denied earlier sat frozen. The two middle-aged men at the bar, the ones who had chuckled when they heard no tables available, now stared into their nearly empty glasses. Malik glanced at them, just enough for them to know he hadn't forgotten. They looked away, as though his gaze might burn. Ava, still at the table, propped her chin on her hand, her voice cool. "You notice that the silence feels different now. It's no longer the silence of contempt. It's the silence of people plotting their exit. Malik nodded slightly, his eyes scanning every face in the room. "Good," he said. "At least now they're starting to understand that power isn't for showing off. It can change owners at any moment." One diner, the same man who had mocked Malik earlier, slid his chair back, as if to leave. Malik didn't look directly at him, but his words cut across the room, calm and sharp. "Sit down, dinner isn't over." The man froze, then slowly sat back, his face red with shame. Ava smirked, stifling a laugh. Malik turned back to the staff. "Look around," he said. "These aren't just wealthy diners. They're people who believe money and status give them the right to decide who belongs where. But tonight, every old rule has been rewritten." The old manager inhaled, as if to speak in his defense. Malik raised his hand, silence. "No explanations," Malik said. "Apologies or excuses won't change the lesson you're all learning tonight." He walked back to the VIP table, pulled out his chair, and sat. Lifting his glass of wine, his voice softened to a near whisper. "Funny, isn't it? Watching people who thought they owned the place realize they were just guests in someone else's house." Ava knew this wasn't over. Malik never left a table before the real game was done. Malik took his time finishing the last bites of his meal, unnervingly calm as the entire room held its breath. No clinking silverware. No chatter. Just the sound of him dining, while everyone else sat frozen staff lined along the walls like soldiers awaiting orders. He set his napkin down with deliberate care. Then he rose. Ava stood as well, slipping on her coat, her eyes sweeping the room. It had changed. The people who had once watched them with smug superiority now kept their heads down, hiding their own embarrassment. Malik walked past the hostess stand. The young hostess was still there, her eyes red, her fingers gripping the counter like it might keep her upright. Malik stopped. "Remember what I told you," he said. "One day you'll have to choose between a polite smile and real decency." She said nothing, but Ava knew the words would haunt her for a long time. At the door, the old manager hurried forward, trying once more to offer an apology. Malik raised his hand to stop him. "Don't," he said, his tone low but firm. "Apologies don't change people. Actions do. I'll be back, and I'll see what you've done." The man fell silent, staring at the floor like a student handed an impossible assignment. Malik pushed the door open. The cool night air rushed against his face. The glow of the streetlights caught his dark suit, making him look less like a dinner guest and more like a man leaving the battlefield with an undeniable victory. Ava followed, quiet for a few steps. Then she laughed softly. "You know," she said, "I've never seen a dinner that felt more like a revolution." Malik stopped at the curb, adjusted his cufflinks, and looked at her. "Sometimes," he said, a smirk tugging at his lips, "the best meal you'll ever have is served at the table that once turned you away." Ava shook her head, still smiling. "And making everyone watch while you eat." Malik didn't reply. He didn't need to. What had happened inside Le Carillon tonight was enough to become the story everyone would retell about the man who walked in as an unwelcome guest, and walked out as if he owned the entire room. And Ava knew. This wasn't the end. Malik never left the table while the game was still in play. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more powerful stories of empathy, justice, and silent strength to life. Your support is what fuels this journey. Let's keep standing together and rising higher, one story at a time. Stay safe and inspired.